Hi, I'm Libby Casey with the Washington Post, and I'm on Capitol Hill in the office of Congresswoman Karen Bass. Thank you so much for allowing us into your space and for talking with us.
You're welcome.
Congresswoman Bass is the second vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC, and the executive board met with President Donald Trump yesterday. So we want to hear your impressions fresh from that meeting. You've called it basically a positive start. How so?
Well, first of all, what led to the meeting was a lot of concerns that members of the Black Caucus have about the way the president has characterized the African American community. And if you remember his famous statement to African Americans, "What do we have to lose?" And we presented him with this book. We have a lot to lose. Solutions for Black families in the 21st century.
I just want to mention, Congresswoman, because our audience is hearing these bells. Can you tell us what the bells are, just so they're not like, is there a fire drill in the Capitol building? What's going on?
No, we are bothered by these bells all the time. The bells call us to do different things. They call a session or they also might call us to vote. So we don't have a vote right now, and it's basically just saying we're getting started for the day on the floor.
To me, it's like the Morse code of what's happening and what you need to do. So luckily, you don't have to leave.
It predates BlackBerries, iPhones.
Right. Totally. Okay. So far more importantly, back to this agenda. I mean, may I pick this up for a moment? So this literally was what you handed to the president.
We handed it to him, and it says, we have a lot to lose. And what we wanted to get him to understand, that in our opinion, we've already lost a lot in 60 days. If you look at his budget, if you see his initial policies, they're policies that hurt not just African Americans, but we think hurt many Americans. So we gave him two examples very specifically. The rollback of the Voting Rights Act. You know, the federal government was involved in a lawsuit in Texas supporting the rights of people to vote. They pulled that back. He pulled the federal government out of that lawsuit, which means the federal government is not going to stand to protect people's right to vote. He also rolled back the consent decrees, which essentially are placed on police departments where we know that there has been misconduct. So there was a consent decree for Chicago and for Baltimore. He rolled that back. But with all of the concerns over people being shot on video and the particular way that has impacted the African American community, those two things alone send a horrible signal to African Americans. And that's in addition to his law and order message, which in our opinion just says we could continue going down the road of over-incarceration, the budget that cuts back essential services in so many ways, and needless to say, the health care bill. The health care bill that is being proposed right now would essentially strip people of so much coverage. And that was not what he promised the American people. So from that perspective, we wanted him to know that we have a lot to lose. And in this booklet, we explain somewhat about African American history, but we also go through some key categories of policy. And at the back of the book are multiple bills. Half the book as a listing of legislation that is being put forward by the Congressional Black Caucus. We didn't want to just go and complain. We didn't want to go and just point out problems. We wanted to go to say, we have solutions. So the other name of this book is Solutions to Advance Black Families in the 21st Century.
You have questions for Representative Bass. You can put them in the comment section and we'll run them by her. We're reflecting on her visit yesterday with President Trump at the White House, along with other members of the Congressional Black Caucus Executive Board. 6 of you were
Six
there?
of us went. The audience should know that there are 49 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, but that doesn't make for a productive meeting. So the leadership of the caucus met. Needless to say, of course, we met with all 49 members to get their input about how they wanted us to present things. We thought that it was a positive meeting in the sense that the president was in a listening mode. There really wasn't any argument that took place. So, you know, we viewed it as a first start, but we have to see what will be produced. Specifically, we want to follow up with members of his cabinet to see if we can actually get some of these proposals adopted.
I mean, did you get any promises? Did you get any sense of a forward direction?
We got no promises. I mean, to be honest, I don't think that we went in there expecting promises, but I think what we did was we opened the dialogue. We will take it from here. But what we weren't interested in was a photo op. We weren't interested in a social gathering. Needless to say, I mean, this is tough. I mean, he spent 8 years denigrating and trying to delegitimize President Obama. We know how that impacted the country as a whole, but especially African Americans.
And you're talking about questioning his birth,
where he
citizenship.
was born, and now calling him a criminal. I mean, These are things, and I think one of the impressions we wanted to leave with him is that when you completely depict a community as being just out of control, chaos, worse than Baghdad, every community has pride. How does he think people feel when he says things like that?
We've got a question coming in from Aaron, who asks how the CBC is dealing with what Aaron calls the president's racist undertones. Now, that's the perspective of this viewer. And you have pointed out that the president on the campaign trail was using language talking about African American communities as completely lawless.
Completely lawless.
But do you find, when Aaron writes this, do you find that the president has used racist language or coded language?
Oh, absolutely he has.
So how do you go into that meeting and how do you work together?
He spent 8 years doing that. Well, he is the president of the United States. And we have to accept that as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and in the leadership. Now, I understand the general public, and let me just tell you, my constituents, there's a lot of people that are not ready or willing or may never accept him as the president. I'm here as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus in leadership. I can't ignore the person who is in the White House for the next 4 years. That is not going to help people in the African American community.
Did you talk to President Trump about some of the language he's used in his past statements?
Yes, we did. We did. Well, we noted that we thought that was very problematic. Again, did he seem open to that message?
It's not easy to hear when someone's like, hey, those things you said, they were offensive.
Well, number one, I would be shocked if it was the first time he was told that. And in fact, I know it's not, because I know that he had met a couple of weeks before with Representative Cummings. Mm-hmm. And I know that he delivered the exact same message. I think the question will be, in the future, will he continue to talk like that? I think everybody knows that he does not have a history of apologizing for stuff that he's done before. Let's take that as a given. The question is, what will his behavior and how will he describe African American communities in the future? Is
it sort of a classic scenario of feeling like you have to go in and educate someone about how to use proper language, how to have a productive dialogue? Is it really fair that that's become your role in the Congressional Black Caucus?
Well, I think absolutely. And that's part of the purpose of this book. This book starts off, with African American history. One of the things that he was surprised by was the fact that we represent 20% of African Americans in the United States. So his question to us was, well, who were the other people? And I think that there is an assumption or a stereotype that an African-American member of Congress only represents African-Americans. I used my district, for example. My district is 30% African-American, 30% Jewish, and about 30% Latino and 10% Asian. And I told him where my district was in Los Angeles, which he was familiar with the area. As a matter of fact, one of his staff members is one of my constituents. Omarosa comes from my district, or she lives there now, moving obviously to DC soon. But I think African Americans in general, African American members of Congress know that part of our role is an education role. Sometimes that gets weary.
Yeah, but I guess that's what I'm wondering. If at a certain point you're like, when does that phase stop, and when can we really move on?
Well, it does get weary, but it is a testament to the lack of education that we have in this country. A lot of people don't realize that we had slavery in the United States for over 200 years. People think slavery is something that existed for 10 or 20 years and don't understand why Black people can't get over it. I'm very glad that we finally have a museum. I am hoping that people go to the museum and learn about African American history. African American history is a little bit beyond Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks.
So we're talking with Representative Bass, member of the Congressional Black Caucus. A lot of good questions and comments coming into our Facebook page. Faith asks a tricky one. Why are Democrats entertaining any ideas put forth by an administration under FBI investigation? Because that was revealed this past Monday in the House Intel Committee briefing by the FBI director, that they are looking at possible connections, collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Well, one thing that I would say is that everything that happened yesterday with the chair of the Intel Committee essentially going over and briefing the president before he even briefed the ranking member is all the more evidence as to why we need an independent 9/11 type commission. It needs to be bipartisan, but it should not involve Congress. What Faith needs to understand is that we weren't entertaining his proposals. We went with our own.
And legislation still happens. I mean, work is still happening. Executive orders and actions are still happening regardless of what the FBI might be looking at. So, Representative, what do you hope to see happen in, let's say, when we hit the 100-day mark of this presidency? I mean, do you have hope that there are some areas you guys can find common ground, whether it's on education, schools?
Well, I have to be hopeful. And so I think the one area where there was dialogue, because for the most part, he was in a listening mode, was when it came to infrastructure and transportation. And so that he wants to do a big infrastructure bill. We will see what that means. We were trying to educate him to the fact that just because you have a transportation bill does not mean that African Americans will be hired. So you need to do a little more. And an example I would give you is that if you're going to have a transportation project, you need to put certain requirements in. Like, for example, the people that live near the transportation project should be able to have a job. And I say that because transportation projects often go through areas that are lower income, where the jobs are needed.
You make a great point. And also is there a danger in dividing up what the African American community needs, which sometimes can just be coded for urban and poor, and certainly does not at all reflect what the African American community as a whole needs, and dividing African Americans from the rest of the country, in the sense of, if we talk about things, if the way the president talks about things, does it just stereotype and limit just all that African Americans bring to the nation, and the diversity that's in not just the CBC, but the nation as a whole?
No, I don't think so. One of the things that we educated him to is that Black people don't just live in the inner city.
Right.
There are African Americans that are middle class, that live in suburbs, that live in rural communities, et cetera. But when I propose transportation projects with a requirement that they hire locally, that is not affirmative action. That is not a quota. That says whoever lives in the neighborhood. So that essentially helps everyone. And given that transportation projects don't usually go through neighborhoods like Beverly Hills, they would tend to be neighborhoods that need the jobs. That's whoever is there. The other thing that we told them is that, a lot of poor districts are represented by white Republicans. I'm not sure that many of my Republican colleagues feel the same commitment to address their lower income constituents. But poor people, lower income folks, people with challenges are not just African American.
All right, we have to leave it there because you have a busy day. We're so glad to get to talk with you. Representative Karen Bass comes from California's 37th District, member of the Congressional Black Caucus, its second vice chair. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks.